Okay, so question one is a spot and find question. You literally just need to find the answer from the text and write down your response. Often it can be just a one-word answer. We certainly don't need any explanation or any technique spotting at all in question one. 3 marks guaranteed. Now, a possible strategy to help save time in the exam is to not actually do number 1 first, but to begin with question 2. And the reason is this: when you're trying to answer question 2, what you need to do is scan the text quite thoroughly. You're looking for lots of examples to help show how the article is being shaped by the author. And as you're doing that, you're actually reading the text quite a lot. So when you come back to do question 1, the answers have probably already stuck in your mind. You've probably already seen those answers as you were doing question 2. So it won't take you very long to do question 1. And that saving of time, it might save you 2 or 3 minutes, and that could be the difference between 1 or 2 marks. So let's zoom in now on question 2. So the question is saying, how does Charles Stammer Smith show us that cycling is an enjoyable activity? There's 2 things I need to focus on. I need to focus on what he says. Okay, so what things is he saying that are related to cycling being enjoyable? And then also, how does he do it? What language techniques does he use to help create that feeling, to help emphasize the enjoyment that he's suggesting cycling gives him? What tone and what sort of structural techniques does the author use to really emphasize the fact that cycling is really enjoyable? And so when I'm scanning through the text in a moment, I'm trying, in the back of my mind, I've always got this idea of, okay, has this word or has this phrase been used to try and make cycling seem more enjoyable? Okay, so here's the text. Let's just quickly recap what elements I need to include in my answer. Okay, so I know that the entire thing is out of 10 marks, which means I really need to be talking about 10 examples. Of those 10 examples, 3 or 4 must include subject terminology. Alright, I must also talk about how the text has been structured, and I must also talk about tone. It's really important that we are aware of these aspects of the criteria so we are eligible for the most amount of marks. Remember too that question 2 is the only question that you need to talk about subject terminology, which means you don't need to mention it in question 4 or question 5 or question 6. Okay, so let's look at how Charles Stammer Smith shows us that cycling is an enjoyable activity. Remember, we're going to be commenting on what he says and also his use of language, tone and structure. So let's begin with the title. It's always the best place to go to first. And the title says Reinventing the Wheel. Now, anything to do with invention seems to be, sort of has this connotation of something quite exciting. So I actually think that you could talk about that in terms of it being a technique that the author uses to make cycling seem an enjoyable activity. It also says that Charles Stammer Smith, he rediscovers a lost love. So cycling obviously has this connection to something he's really enjoyed at some previous stage. The picture itself could be worth commenting on. The man looks quite relaxed, he looks quite peaceful as he's looking over a pleasant countryside. And so by using the image, the author is trying to position the reader in such a way that cycling is clearly connected to this feeling of serenity and peacefulness, and therefore it's an enjoyable activity. And that's exactly what I would write in my response. Let's go to the actual text itself now. So it starts off, my own conversion to cycling has come quite late, nothing much to talk about there. I remember childhood holidays in France where I would pedal among the villages in search of bread and adventure. Okay, so here the author is actually suggesting that there's a connection to adventure when he cycles. Now obviously that has a very positive connotation and is showing that it's an enjoyable activity. He then continues to say that he's revelling in the freedom of pedal power. Now, revelling means to take great delight in. So he's taking great delight in the freedom that he's having as he's cycling along. And we can all go back to our own childhood experiences and remember just how cool that felt when you were just cycling around with not too much care in the world. So there's a clear link here to cycling being an enjoyable activity. And now to finish off this paragraph, the author suggests that he's imagining that he was one of the Tour de France greats. And we all know, as children, when you get lost in that sort of imagination, and you think that you are playing with the best of the best, it becomes really, really enjoyable. And that's the exact feeling that the author is going for here in this first paragraph. If we want to talk about the structure then, clearly the author is deliberately taking us back into our own childhoods as he begins the article. He's trying to make us reconnect to that feeling of freedom and that feeling of real enjoyment that we have whenever we engaged in something that we really liked when we were kids. So effectively the author has got everybody on his side in the first paragraph. Okay, so let's move on to the second paragraph. Then came adolescence and girls and cars. Cycling was no longer cool, and the limitations of a bike rather than its freedoms became all too apparent. Now this seems like he's actually contradicting what he's saying in the first paragraph. Now all of a sudden cycling isn't cool. But actually this is a structural technique by the author here. He knows that if he just only talks about cycling being incredible, then people might think that this is a special sort of person who, is destined to be a cyclist. But what he's actually doing here by suggesting that he lost the love of it when adolescence came is that he's normal. And what he's trying to do then is say that, well, now when you're older, you can rekindle and rediscover that lost love of cycling. Okay, so now that we've looked at structure, let's also bring in the idea of tone now. Now I think it's actually reasonably clear now that the author is trying to establish a fairly light-hearted, a fairly humorous, and a fairly relaxed tone. And what we need to do now is think about why that might be the case. What's the purpose of that tone? Well, on this occasion, he's trying to connect those feelings of being light-hearted and being relaxed to the idea of cycling. So it's certainly a useful technique to try and make cycling seem more enjoyable. And that's exactly what question 2 is asking us to do, to prove how the author has created a feeling of enjoyment around cycling. Okay, so now we've got quite a few examples just from the very beginning of the text. In fact, we've got 5 or 6 that we could easily discuss. But what's important though is that if you're interested in accessing the top 2 bands in question 2, so if you want sort of 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 marks, you need to talk about a range of examples from the text. And the reason is because the examiner wants to be confident that you've read the entire text and that you can see how language techniques are being used throughout the text to possibly alter the mood or the feeling that the overall feeling that the author is going for as the text progresses. So having said that, now what we need to do is find some more examples. So let's go into the next paragraph. It says here, however, there is nothing like purchasing new gear to give you an inflated sense of your sporting prowess. Okay, so purchasing new gear might be something that we might discuss in terms of creating a feeling of enjoyment. Everybody loves to shop. Everybody likes to buy new things. Then we've got this idea of the inflated sense of your sporting prowess. Now, I think this is a humorous example here. He's trying to, again, relate to the common person, realising that, he's sort of taking the mick out of himself a little bit here, realising that he's thinking he's a bit more of himself because he's got this new equipment. So it's a humorous approach to the text, and the author has chosen this approach deliberately because he knows that if he's got people laughing, they're more likely to be persuaded that cycling is an enjoyable activity. So humour is in fact used throughout the rest of this paragraph and the next one indeed as well. But let's look to see if there's any other techniques available to spot. And I'm going to come down to here, it says, I stride down the stairs with new purpose. Okay, this active verb, stride, all right, suggesting that he's determined now. Now, because he's got this new equipment, he's now determined to get out there and cycle along the roads. There's also the British Lycra Brotherhood. Okay, and the word brotherhood is worth mentioning here too, because brotherhood is a collection of people, and there's this support, connotation of support around that particular word. So he's active, there's a sense of community, he feels streamlined and ready for anything. Okay, so cycling it's actually gone beyond enjoyment now, it's actually giving him purpose, all worth discussing in an answer. As we come further down the page, there's more reference to humour in here, talking about how ridiculous he looks, and his wife joking that she wants to get a divorce because he looks silly, and it's maybe not what she signed up for. Now in this last paragraph on this first page, the author is really keen to emphasise the enjoyment by describing the benefits that he is feeling from cycling around. He says he has a wave of smugness washes over him. Okay, he's not just happy about it, but he's almost arrogant about how much he's enjoying this new freedoms that he has. And this idea of contrast then helps to emphasise this point too, where he's weaving easily through noisy commuters and choking traffic. Okay, so two metaphors there of choking traffic is a very effective metaphor, because choking is a very violent and negative word, and so if the traffic is making you feel like that and he's able to avoid it by being on a bike, then clearly a sense of great enjoyment is being experienced. And again, this idea of contrast is reinforced at the very end of this paragraph, where he says one right turn towards Box Hill and suddenly, and then we've got the ellipsis there, which means that there's missing information, and then silence. Okay, so the last word ending in silence. In other words, he's escaped all of the craziness of the city driving, and now he has this ultimate feeling of enjoyment, where now he is experiencing silence, peacefulness and calmness. Okay, so we've got a lot of examples here on this first page, and ideally what I would do is continue this by going on to the second page to make sure I've got a range of examples from the whole text. But let's just, for the sake of seeing where we're up to at the moment, okay, we've definitely used a lot of subject terminology in there. We've definitely talked about structure. We've definitely talked about tone. All right, and even on this page, we've probably got at least 10 examples. So now all I've got to do is make sure that every one of the examples that I decide to talk about are all linked back to the topic. And in this question 2 on this text, the topic is about cycling being enjoyable. So every single example I discuss needs to link back to the idea that the author has used this piece of language to emphasise that cycling is enjoyable. Simple stuff.